Welcome to the Chrisman Commentary, Daily Mortgage News Podcast. I'm your host, Robbie Chrisman. Topics on today's episode include a whole lot of chatter out of Washington, D.C., not so much about the shutdown, but more about what's going on with 50-year mortgages and FHA and stuff of that nature. My interview with TransUnion, Satyan Merchant, on how credit data is evolving from a static score to a dynamic, predictive asset and what lenders can do right now to turn this wave of disruption into opportunity. And let's do a little primer on extensions because someone somewhere is paying for them. In the mortgage industry, it's easy to assume everyone understands the process of pulling credit. After all, it's a standard part of origination. But many professionals, even those adjacent to lending, don't fully grasp the infrastructure, data flows, and participants involved in approving a new homeowner for a mortgage. Mortgage lenders choose TransUnion for their identity-focused, data-driven mortgage insights and solutions, enabling them to achieve more desirable lending outcomes in a volatile housing market. To learn more, visit transunion.com. It's dog eat dog in the ranks of FHFA and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The question is, does anyone care or is anyone surprised? We want to follow the law, right? Everyone knows that the Trump administration fired the Inspector General and Fannie's ethics staff. Now, the Wall Street Journal reports that Fannie Mae watchdog probed how Pulte obtained mortgage records of key Democrats. FHA's acting Inspector General handed probe reports to the U.S. Attorney Office that had indicted New York Attorney General Letitia James. Fannie Mae watchdogs, who were removed from their jobs, have been probing if Trump appointee Bill Pulte had improperly obtained mortgage records of key Democratic officials, including New York Attorney General Letitia James, according to people familiar with the matter. Speaking of Bill Pulte and his staff, recently notable for the 50-year mortgage equation, now President Trump is backtracking on extending loan amortization past QM guidelines. The lack of affordability is a result of many things, and everyone in the industry knows that amortization terms are not high on the list. One cost out there is extensions. For MLOs who lock their borrowers at the lows or before some major news or election results, I continue to be asked about why extending a rate lock, if even for a few days, for something beyond the control of the borrower, costs money. The cost to extend a best efforts lock reflects the cost incurred by the secondary marketing team to move the corresponding hedge to reflect the new closing date. It's an easier concept to understand if you acknowledge the inequity of hedging a mortgage pipeline. Best efforts locks, which may or may not close, are given for free to loan officers, then hedged with mandatory security instruments. When a lock extension is granted, the hedge needs to reflect the change in delivery dates. For example, when a loan comes in with a 45-day lock, your hedge model will pull from your LOS the estimated closing date to best execute that loan for delivery into the secondary markets. In the process, it determines what month security needs to be sold off to set the 45-plus days of interest rate exposure that loan will incur. If that 45-day lock was taken out September 1st with an October 15th estimated funding, a November security would probably be sold as the hedge instrument. And only 7-day extension might just mean that loan best executes into a December commitment, meaning you must now buy back your November coverage and sell a December security to match the new closing date. This roll from a front month security to a back month has a transactional cost. Much of the fee charged to extend a loan with your secondary group reflects this cost. For today's interview, I wanted to welcome back to the show TransUnion's Satyan Merchant to talk about how credit data is evolving from a static score to a dynamic predictive asset and what lenders can do right now to turn this wave of disruption into opportunity.
Let's start by talking about the role of credit data today. And we'll start with something kind of foundational here. Everyone pulls credit. Everyone uses the score. There's been a lot of headlines out there lately. What's changing? Why is credit data suddenly at the center of innovation?
Thanks for having a great question here. The role of credit is just becoming more and more important. It's because the consumer is just more dynamic than ever. And credit data itself is even evolving as a dynamic asset. It's not your father's credit data, I guess you would say. For instance, over the past decade, we've seen a surge in available data. There's obviously the traditional credit data that many consumers are familiar with, right? Like their maybe their credit card payment, their auto payment, their mortgage. But the things that are changing are trended credit data, which we can get into, alternative sources like rental payments, buy now pay later data, and even consumer permission data. And so all of these are really great because they offer a predictive picture of the consumer, and ultimately that should help expand access to mortgage credit. I'll add that FHFA, they had a push to modernize and improve score competition, and we believe that's a great thing. It ensures the safety and soundness in the system. It gets more people access to mortgages. And I think at the end of the day, between tri-merge credit report and modern scores, really lenders and investors have a complete view of the borrower, which helps them make good pricing decisions, safe decisions, and expand credit.
So you're calling the credit report a dynamic asset, which is a very forward-thinking way of looking at it. But for people listening out there, lenders, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so traditionally, credit reports were static snapshots, right? They captured a borrower's financial behavior at a single point in time. For instance, just think about this, right? If you go check your credit report today, and you might think it's just simply a snapshot of what happened in this current month with your auto payment, your credit card payment, maybe even your rent payment if that's being reported. The reality is it's actually much more dynamic than that. At least with trended data, which TransUnion pioneered, I think, over a decade ago, the GSEs even adopted in 2016. A trended credit report actually has 30 months of data from TransUnion, and it allows the lender to see real patterns in a consumer's relationship to credit. I'll give you one example, Robbie. So, and I love this one. There could be 3 consumers right now who all 3 of them have an aggregated amount of credit card balances. One consumer had, all 3 of them, by the way, have a $5,000 balance, right? Now, the difference with trended data is, let's say consumer A 6 months ago had a $10,000 balance, and today their balance is $5,000 on their credit cards. Consumer B, 6 months ago, they had a 0 balance, and now it's up to $5,000. And consumer C, it's been between $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 every month over the last 6 months. I think just intuitively, all 3 of those consumers are doing very different things at this given moment in time, right? One of them is paying down their balance, which is probably very positive. Another one is building balances, which may not be a great sign. And the third one has been really steady, which is, it's also a signal. And so that trended data that's an example of the dynamic nature in a single credit report that shows you what's been going on over time. And that really helps with lenders as they want to, 1, expand the access for mortgages or home ownership, 2, make sure they have the right amount of risk management, and 3, at the end of the day, make a safer asset available to investors. And again, I mentioned the GSEs began using this trended data in 2016. That really has helped continue to have a very safe and stable mortgage market over the last decade.
Yes, safe, stable. Those are all things that people might not realize the credit reporting agencies play a huge role in providing to the American public and to the housing market as a whole. I do want to talk about regulatory pressure because it seems like you can't swing a dead cat around without that sort of topic coming up in today's political environment. I'll throw another animal out there. It's an elephant in the room. The FHFA changes. Some in the industry say this adds cost and complexity. Others say it's long overdue. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, the FHFA's recent policy shift has opened the door to long overdue innovation in the mortgage credit scoring market. It's really a door that other industries have walked through years and years ago. I also oversee our auto business here at TransUnion, and what's going on in mortgage now, which is really a watershed moment, is something that auto lenders, who tend to be some of the more sophisticated lenders out there, credit card lenders as well, have been doing for years. Lender choice is what the FHFA calls this program of opening up the competition for credit scores. And it's great that lenders are now able to embrace new models and data sources. I talked about a little bit earlier the different variations and types of the explosion of data out there. Again, I said, the rental payments, the utility payments. VantageScore 4.0 is built using those alternative data assets, and most importantly, that trended data that I just talked about. And so again, it's what I think is really great is that the score itself is the framework already exists for the score to take into account all of this behavior that a consumer, I think, should really be rewarded for, get credit for, making their rent payments on time, paying their short-term loans on time. And so what's great is that just with the adoption of the Vantage score, immediately the data that's on the credit report is counted. I also would say that it's really important to, again, pair that with all data available. And I mentioned earlier the tri-merge credit report. I would say when you start to think about all three bureaus, which actually do have very different data, because all three bureaus tend to, when we do compete, we do a lot of investment in acquiring these sorts of alternative trade lines. When you have the power of a score that counts those trade lines, and then pair that up with all of the data available on a consumer from all three national bureaus, you're really getting the full picture of the consumer. And that's, I think, the direction that FHFA wants to get to. I misspoke and said FHA, but I think FHA, USDA, VA, and all investors really should, again, like in other industries, start to consider using this wider assortment of data. One data point from our study is that we saw 4 million additional or incremental credit-worthy borrowers could lose access to mortgage credit when you take away some of that data. And that ends up costing more to consumers with higher prices, higher interest rates. And ultimately, as we saw in 2008 and 2009, when you have less data, at the end of the day, the taxpayer holds the bag and pays the bill. And so we're working really closely with regulators and industry partners to take advantage of that innovation, but do it responsibly, right? We at the MBA conference, there was somebody on stage talking about this topic. It was actually the founder and CEO of Freedom Mortgage, and he made a great comment. He said that the U.S. mortgage market is the envy of the global financial housing system, and it's true. Our system is predicated on lots of data, adding data as the GSEs did in 2016 with trended data. Now with FHFA thinking through adding things like Vantage score or score competition, adding even more data to the underwriting decision. All of that, really sound data on a consumer helps our mortgage system in the United States be one of the lowest cost in the world, one of the most liquid in the world, and one that really helps people get in, the home ownership American dream, which I think every other country in the world is envious of.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I do want to dive into this topic a little deeper, and that's kind of alternative data. We obviously know the importance of good data, especially in this age of AI and automation, where it's the better inputs, the better outputs. And I keep hearing about this alternative data, rent, cash flows, buy now, pay later, BNPL. I Klarna'd my burrito from Chipotle last night. So is this actually being used in mortgage decisions, or is it still mostly theoretical? Asking for a friend here.
Well, I hope the burrito was good, but it's real and it's growing, right? Like, rent trade lines have been in development for over a decade. The innovation isn't new when it comes to rent trade lines, but it's gaining visibility. And again, as I mentioned before, all the bureaus compete to get as many trade lines as possible. Rent is a fragmented market. There aren't just 2 or 3 rental companies out there. There's hundreds, if not thousands. But we did a study on rent trade lines, and we found that when rent trade lines are included, over 10%, 12% of consumers moved up to a higher credit score tier because they're getting the credit for the rent that they pay on time, which is traditionally not on a static credit report or a traditional credit report. And when you have those 12% of consumers moving up to that higher credit tier, it really qualifies them for better mortgage terms. Again, as I mentioned before, with adoption of Vantage 4.0, that doesn't include or incorporate the trended and the alternative data. We believe that, and there's actually a study from Vantage Score, 33 million more consumers could be scored, which is the first step in getting a mortgage. Just simply having a credit score is the front door of getting a mortgage. And then ultimately, of those 33 million, the research showed that about 5 million became mortgage eligible who were previously not. Your question about is it real? Are these being counted? Again, the industry is dynamic and transition. I think this is a time in the industry that's never been more innovative amongst the credit bureaus, and a lot of it has to do with the financial innovation. I mean, you mentioned, the buy now, pay later for your DoorDash or for your meal last night. Buy now, pay later is relatively new. I know I can speak for TransUnion. We have the framework and the ability to start to take on those trade lines. We're starting to receive some of them. Again, we do things and we think about it. We work with the industry, we work with regulators to make it more, to make sure that whatever we're innovating is also in a safe and a responsible way. And so I think what we'll see in future years as the buy now, pay later industry continues to mature, those who make those loans continue to furnish the trade lines to the bureaus, you'll start to see more of that on the TransUnion credit report. Another one that I mentioned was our short-term lending data. That's a database that we acquired a few years ago called Factor Trust. That data is being used in pretty much every other industry already to help make safe underwriting decisions. So, the extent to which that the adoption of these newer, more modern scores like Vantage Score takes hold in mortgage, we'll start to gain the benefit of all these innovative, alternative and trended data.
Regular listeners of this podcast know I like to take things to the practical, or in this case, kind of tactical, if you will. So if you're a lender, originator, or servicer listening today, what should they be doing right now to capitalize on this moment where we're moving from static to predictive?
Yeah, this is really the most important point. I'm glad you asked this one, Robbie. I'd say there's three things that a lender and originator can start to do today. One is, obviously, I think most, if not all in the industry, are following the FHFA and the evolution of credit scoring models. The industry is working through, especially the GSEs and FHFA, to fully implement that transition. But for now, any lender could use this time to test. Run a sample of loans through both scoring models or multiple scoring models, including Vantage Score. Use the same data to start to see the different insights on what is different about consumers. Get familiar with the odds charts, which is a more technical term of just how these scores work and how they predict default. And, start to track things like approval rates, pricing differences. That's number one, is get familiar with these new innovative tools that are now available in the market. I think the second one is to revisit how data is being used, not just in underwriting, but at the top of the funnel. Of course, the big one is the scoring, the lender's choice and the scoring model competition, but the GSEs are highly innovative. I applaud them for really pushing the ball forward in these last couple of years. One of the more recent programs was the early assessment program, which is a pre-qualification program. TransUnion, our solution that lenders can use to participate in that program, is called the True Vision Early Access Soft Check. So this is a way that a lender can get a much clearer picture of a consumer earlier in that mortgage process, like maybe when they're shopping, when they're not quite ready to have contract in hand and apply for the mortgage, but just see what they can afford, see what they could qualify for. I think that's one great example of a lender can take steps now to update their workflows and start to use data top of funnel. And then lastly, the world is digital. We're seeing so much activity in the mortgage market with acquisitions, M&A, new products, new workflows, things like using digital marketing as a way to engage a consumer, whether it's app-based or through digital channels or traditional channels. TransUnion offers a wide suite of true audience solutions rather, that help really find the consumer. The last one is, again, the credit data, not just for underwriting, also through the back end. I think that familiarity with trended data, that example I gave earlier of the consumer whose credit card balances are going in the different directions, that's not just useful for underwriting, but servicers. It's a great signal that servicers can use to say, hey, Satyan, when he originated the mortgage, his credit card balances were around 2,000-3,000 every month, and now all of a sudden they're exploding to 10,000-12,000 per month. If a servicer has that insight, which they can get with trended data, they could really reach out to that consumer, in this case me, and start to find those signals. Say, hey, is something going on? Should we put you in a different mortgage? Is a way that we can get you, get ahead of any possible challenges down the road.
Yeah, there's certainly so much going on. It's like a revolution in all these different areas at once. We talked, we didn't even talk rates really. We've touched on regulation. Obviously, technology is applied in a ton of different use cases. it can be overwhelming for some people out there just trying to get all of their ducks in a row here. Do you view all this as a headwind or a tailwind?
Yeah, I think that that's great. That's probably a whole nother podcast of just kind of opining on what's going on. And I come back to a phrase I use a lot. I use it, with my team, and I kind of use it everywhere. It's like control the controllables, right? And so no one in this, if we could control or predict rates, this would be a boring industry, Robbie. So obviously it's more about reacting and controlling what we can do in response to what's going on with technology, regulation, and rates. So I would say what we can control, at least in the lens that we have here at TransUnion, is back to the consumer and control what, using all tools available at our fingertips as a lender to know as much as we possibly can about a consumer. So that full picture, whether it's in the marketing, as I talked about, certainly in the underwriting and how their relationship to credit is, and what we can see about a consumer that might have been missing in the past, to offer them the right products and services and even better rates. I think that's what it's about. And TransUnion, we believe that, identity is at the core of the consumer. It shows up in the credit data, it shows up in the marketing, it shows up in the risk management. And so the closer that a lender can get to really getting that full picture using the best identity that they have, we believe TransUnion offers that. I think that's what really can help us get through whether there's a headwind or a tailwind in the industry.
Yes, and we're all in this business because we believe in the dream of home ownership. We're just trying to do it in the best way possible. Any final thoughts before I let you go today?
Yeah, I mean, it might sound like a broken record here, but we do believe that credit data is evolving, and it's at the same time with this mortgage industry really evolving. I think that the last year or two has been just quite a bit of change in this industry. And maybe we're even turning the corner on things like rates or volumes. I think putting together the data, smarter decisions, better consumer experiences ultimately ends up with better outcomes for consumers, for taxpayers, for investors, and for lenders. I think it's on all of us, right? Every player in the industry to explore what's available, uphold the integrity of the process, and make data-driven decisions that shape the future of what we're all collectively building.
Very inspiring. I'm listening to you over here, kind of like, yes, pumping my fist to that. So, Satyan, it's always a pleasure having you on the podcast. I really appreciate it last time we did it, and I'm already looking forward to the next one. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you as well, Robbie.
Mortgage applications increased 0.6% from 1 week earlier, according to data from the Mortgage Bankers Association's weekly mortgage application survey for the week ending November 7th. Turning our collective gaze to interest rates via the bond market, today sees the bond market reopening and is full of Fed appearances and Treasury supply, while the only economic news is mortgage applications, the aforementioned ones, from MBA for the week ending November 7th. Markets will digest remarks from New York Fed President Williams, Philadelphia Fed President Paulson, Fed Governor Waller, Atlanta Fed President Bostic, who is always talking, Fed Governor Mirren, and Boston Fed President Collins. Treasury will auction $42 billion of 10-year notes. We begin Wednesday with agency MBS prices better than Monday's close by nearly an eighth, the 2-year yielding 3.56 and the 10-year yielding 4.07 after closing Monday at 4.11%. Let's wrap up with a joke and some housekeeping. A woman, cranky because her husband was late coming home again, decided to leave a note saying, "I've had enough and have left you. Don't bother coming after me." Then she hides under the bed to see his reaction. After a short while, the husband comes home, and she could hear him in the kitchen before he comes into the bedroom. She could see him walk toward the dresser and pick up the note. After a few minutes, he wrote something on it before picking up the phone and calling someone. "She's gone." "Yeah, I know. About damn time. I'm coming to see you. Put on that sexy French nightie. I love you. I can't wait to see you. We'll do all the naughty things you like." He hung up, grabbed his keys, and left. She heard the car drive off as she came out from under the bed. Seething with rage, with tears in her eyes, she grabbed the note to see what he wrote. "I can see your feet. We're out of bread. Be back in 5 minutes." Thanks again to TransUnion for sponsoring today's podcast. Mortgage lenders choose TransUnion for their identity-focused, data-driven mortgage insights and solutions, enabling them to achieve a more desirable lending outcome or lending outcomes in a volatile housing market. To learn more, visit transunion.com.